This cleaning service worker is incredibly energetic. Even during her night shift, she remains full of spirit. She cleans the police station while dancing like a K-pop idol. But then she accidentally drops a box containing files from the latest murder case. The victim's name was Antonio Costa. Morgan glances through the files, noticing that the police have listed Antonio's wife as the prime suspect. However, Morgan's instincts tell her otherwise. She feels that the police have made a mistake. She crosses out the word suspect on the case board and replaces it with victim.
The next morning, Detective Karadak, who was in charge of Antonio's case, arrived at the office. He was about to discuss the latest updates on the case when he suddenly became furious upon seeing that his case board had been scribbled on by someone else. No one in the office admitted to doing it.
They then checked the CCTV footage and discovered that the culprit was the cleaning lady at their office named Morgan. Detective Karadek immediately went to her house, arrested her, and brought her to the station. Captain Selina told her that interfering with an investigation was a serious crime. Morgan could be jailed for obstructing justice. Morgan explained that she never meant to interfere, she just had a different way of thinking. Whenever she saw something wrong, she felt compelled to fix it. Detective Karadek didn't seem convinced by Morgan's words. Then, Captain Selina placed the briefcase on the table and asked Morgan to analyze it.
Morgan showed a photo of the sofa. The cushions were neatly arranged in matching colors, as were all the other items in the house. From that, she concluded that the homeowner was someone who valued tidiness. However, there was one curtain that hadn't been tied properly. Morgan suggested that the curtain tie might have been used to restrain the victim. She then pointed out tape marks on the legs of a chair. Notably, Antonio's hands showed no signs of being tied, meaning someone else had been restraining that chair, and that person was Antonio's wife.
Meanwhile, Antonio's body was lying on the floor, meaning there was a third person who acted as the executor. That was the person Detective Karadek needed to find. However, that didn't mean Morgan was released. She had to remain in custody until her speculation could be proven true.
Not long after, another officer entered the room and informed them that a third person had also come to the house on the day of the murder. Before confirming this, Detective Karadek ordered that Morgan be detained. Morgan was held for a day for interfering with police work. However, they obtained CCTV footage from outside the victim's house, and from it they discovered a young woman who had visited the house just 30 minutes before the murder occurred.
First, they immediately summoned the girl for questioning. However, she firmly denied the accusation, insisting that she had been at home all day during the time of the murder and had never gone to the victim's house. Detective Karadek and his entire team were left completely puzzled. Meanwhile, Morgan was finally released. Before leaving, she caught a glimpse of the CCTV footage and claimed that it was fake. She pointed out that the date and time were wrong. Detective Karadek brushed off her remark, but Captain Selina stopped him and asked Morgan to explain. Morgan then clarified that in the footage, the wind was blowing from south to north, whereas during the summer to fall season, the wind always blows from north to south.
This meant that the footage shown was actually from several months ago. To mislead the police, the old recording had been replaced with one bearing a new date and timestamp. All of Morgan's statements were later verified, and they turned out to be true. The detectives were stunned. As Morgan was about to leave the police station, Captain Selina stopped her and asked how she had managed to figure all of this out.
Morgan replied, "I have an IQ of 160. That means my thinking and observation skills are far beyond those of an ordinary person. I've also watched plenty of documentaries, which helps me analyze things like this with ease."
In the next scene, Detective Karadek meets the victim's daughter. She tells him something strange. A woman named Sarah had sent a letter to her mother, who later went missing. The girl explains that right after her mother read that letter, she died. Detective Karadek is shocked and begins to wonder about the contents of the letter and its possible connection to the murder case. To find out, he needed the letter, which might be at the victim's wife's house or at her office. He then informed Captain Selina. Seeing that the case was becoming more complicated, Captain Selina asked Morgan to help handle it. First of all, they needed the letter that might be in the missing wife's office. Detective Karadek went to that office and asked the boss for permission to search, but the boss refused. At the office, Detective Karadek explained the entire case to Morgan, including the timeline of events. From there, Morgan noticed that the missing wife's sister showed no emotional attachment, even though she had a close relationship with the victim.
The detectives then took her to the house for investigation. There, Morgan discovered that the woman was actually a biologist, and from her behavior, it was clear that she was hiding something from the police. Morgan told Karadek about this, but Karadek didn't find anything suspicious. To solve the case, the letter was crucial. Therefore, Morgan sneaked into the office without telling anyone and stole the letter under the pretense of cleaning.
When he brought it to Detective Karadek, the detective became angry because Morgan could have been imprisoned again for his actions. However, Morgan replied, "Whatever happens, we'll deal with it later. For now, read this letter." Through the letter, they learned that Brian, a powerful man in the city, had assaulted a noble woman. Sarah wanted the case to be taken to court, so she sought help from the victim's wife. But before she could do anything, Sarah died. Now Brian had also become the main suspect. Because of that, Detective Karadek summoned him to the police station. Brian firmly denied it, saying that he did not commit the murder because he was not at the scene on the day of the incident.
However, the officers discovered that Brian had been in Fountain City on the day of the murder. Before the investigation could continue, the boss of the office where Morgan had stolen the letter came to press legal charges against him. Detective Karadek became furious because Morgan had made another mistake despite being warned not to. As a result, the investigation was put on hold.
Karadek then removed Morgan from the case. However, the next day, impressed by Morgan's intelligence, Karadek came to see her again to ask for help. He couldn't understand Brian's connection to the case. Brian had been in Fontana on the day of the murder, specifically with a gang. Morgan thought for a moment, then said that the murder hadn't actually happened on the day it was reported. According to her, the murder might have occurred several days earlier and was later altered and presented as if it had just happened.
Detective Karadek asked in astonishment, "How can you be so sure about all this?" To explain, Morgan took him to the victim's house. There, they confirmed that the temperature inside the house was very low, preventing the body from decomposing and making the bloodstains appear as if they were fresh. Karadek looked at him again, still unable to fully understand. Then Morgan said, "Look, that woman is Lyneth, the missing victim's wife. Her sister never came to discuss the case and showed no concern. When we went to her house, we saw many Fontaine artifacts there. That means she had recently been to the city of Fontaine. What's surprising isn't that she went there, but that she went there on the same date as Brian, and everything here indicates that the murder took place on those very dates."
From all this, it was easy to deduce that Brian was her lover. When Brian found out that Lyneth was going to take on Sarah's case, he brought her sister along to confront Lyneth and force her to back off. He must have threatened Lyneth, and when Lyneth's husband raised his gun to scare him, Brian wasn't afraid. Instead, he tried to grab the weapon, and in the struggle, Lyneth's husband was shot. Now the case had turned into a murder. To cover everything up, he first detained Lyneth, since Lyneth's sister was a biologist. That's why he carefully planned everything to save himself.
He lowered the house's temperature so the evidence wouldn't appear old. When checking the CCTV footage, the old recordings had been replaced with new timestamps. Then, they kidnapped Lyneth on the same day, making everyone believe she had fled after killing her own husband. Seeing all of this, Morgan guessed where Lyneth was likely being held. Interestingly, his guess was correct.
Not long after, the team arrived at the place where Lyneth was being held and rescued her. The perpetrators were eventually caught and the case came to an end. Everyone was astonished. Morgan had solved such a complex case with ease. That was why Captain Celine offered him a job as a detective. However, he declined, as a job would take too much of his time while he wanted to spend it with his family.